So you want to know how to avoid bad wrist angles when playing the bass guitar. Well, in this video, I'm going to show you the best tips on hand position on the bass. That way you'll avoid wrist pain. It'll also help you prevent injury and allow you to play for longer durations without feeling pain. So here are the best tips on how to avoid wrist angles on the bass. Coming up. Hey, what's up? Post-Seated here with Inspire Bass, and in here we're all about helping you grow faster on the bass so you can sound better and have more confidence when you're jamming with other people. So if you like lessons like these, consider subscribing. Let's get on with the video. Playing with wrist angles on the bass is a common thing. You'll see even professionals will encounter these acute wrist angles when they're playing the bass, particularly with their right hand, and then even sometimes with their fretting hand too as well. And it's not that you're going to be able to avoid it at all, 100% of the time. Sometimes depending on what type of passage you're playing, you might just encounter a wrist angle. The thing is, you don't want to be staying at these acute wrist angles for a very long time, because what ends up happening is you end up cutting out, any sort of your nerves end up getting pinched here. So you'll end up developing some sort of weakness with your wrists. You'll also feel pain. You could get carpal tunnel, things like that. So you want to avoid staying in these prolonged periods of what I call Tyrannosaurus Rex wrists. I can't even say it, but try to avoid that. And so here's how you can do that. First thing to keep in mind is the higher your bass is on your body, the less likely you will have a wrist angle on your fretting hand, but the higher likelihood you'll have a wrist angle with your plucking hand. Okay, so when the bass is high, you'll see that your fretting hand is going to be very relaxed, but your plucking hand is going to be very bent. And if your bass is very low, your plucking hand is going to be very relaxed, but your wrist is going to be bent. So you want to explore with the height of your bass. And try to strike the best balance that you can with that. The second thing is with your right hand. If you think of your bass like a flat plane, if it's just sitting on your lap. Now I'm going to turn a little bit to the side so you can see this. If I just were to rest my hand on the bass like I am sitting at a table, it's going to be very neutral, and this is a pretty good position here. Okay. And the idea is that you want to have it feel like this or be in the same type of position when you bring the bass back up. But there's a couple things you should observe so that you can actually remain in this position. The first thing is really that this palm is touching the bass. And I'm really talking about the base of my thumb. Okay, and that's just kind of I'm not pushing against the bass, but it's just touching the surface. So that when I go up, I'm keeping this part of my palm touching against the surface, and that's going to keep my wrist neutral. Second thing is, if your thumb stays anchored on the pick or a string, when I move to the higher strings, there's a higher likelihood from now my palm to leave the surface of the bass. So that's going to cause a wrist angle. Okay, so you can do what's called a floating thumb. I call it more of a hovering thumb because I actually don't press against my strings. So I just hover when I play. Okay, so this is how you can eliminate wrist angles for your plucking hand. Okay. The second thing is now for your fretting hand. You want to angle your bass almost like a shotgun, and I call this the shotgun method. So for instance, I'm sitting, my knee is going this direction, and let me try to point towards you so you can kind of see how much of an angle we're talking here. So my shoulders are actually flush against the camera at this time, and my bass is now pointing this way. And you can see that having your bass angled will keep your wrist neutral even at the highest positions of the bass. Okay, so even when I play chords, okay, now if I were to bring my elbow back, for instance, a lot of people I see play their bass with their bass flat against their body. When I get to the higher frets, it's really hard to not, or even my lower frets, it's really hard to not play with a wrist angle. So by moving the bass a little bit forward like a shotgun, now my wrist straightens out. Okay, so explore the angle of your bass as far, and what I mean by angle is how far you point the headstock forward, okay? And that will keep your wrist neutral. Okay, so here's a quick summary again of the things to keep in mind. The higher your bass is on your body, the higher that your bass is on the body, the more relaxed and less likely you'll have wrist angles with your fretting hand. However, you're more likely to have wrist angles with your plucking hand. So you want to strike that balance. With your plucking hand, try to keep this palm touching the surface of your bass. You don't press against it, but you're really just more like just touching it. The closer this palm is to your bass, the less likely your wrist is going to float forward and start to bend. Also, explore floating your thumb string to string versus keeping it fixed, because as it's fixed, the higher strings, especially if you start to play 5-string or 6-string bass, the more of a wrist angle you're going to experience. And then as well for your fretting hand, explore with your headstock, somewhat forward in front of the body in more of an angle like a shotgun. So a good way to think about it is the headstock is right directly above my left knee. If you're left-handed, then it'll be on your other knee, but for me, the headstock is above my left knee, and that creates this sort of triangle, and it keeps my left hand or my fretting hand very neutral on the fretboard. So I hope this video showed you some things that you can explore to avoid bending your wrist when you're playing the bass guitar. Now, I'd like to hear from you. Did I miss anything? Or is there anything that you do to maintain your hand position when you're playing the bass? Let me know in the comment section below. And if you found any value in this video, hit that like button, share it, and also subscribe. Keep advancing, and I'll see you in the next video. So you want to know how to avoid bad wrist angles when playing the bass guitar. Well, in this video, I'm going to show you a few simple tips about hand position on the bass, so you'll avoid a few simple tips about hand position on the bass guitar. That way you'll avoid wrist pain when playing the bass. That way you'll avoid wrist pain when playing the bass. That way you'll avoid wrist pain when playing the bass.